What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Darian is Fishing. Today I'm going to go over my setups for fishing docks, and not just skipping docks, but fishing them in general. What all you need, because a lot of times when you think of fishing docks, you think of, you know, pitching under the actual dock itself, and how far can we slide something up under there, what can we post to the edges or the ladder, and we get hung up thinking about that. And there's a little bit more to it, at least that I like to do. So I would like to just share that with you guys today. First and foremost, obviously a jig is gonna be, you know, probably your primary lure for when you're fishing boat docks, because a jig skips really well, it's compact. This is just a 3/8 ounce jig. It's a Divine jig by 6th Sense. Normally you've got a pretty bulky trailer on the back. So what that does is that trailer, when you skip the bait, like when you want to go skip under a dock, there's shade under there. Once the sun gets up really high, that's the best time to use the jig, because, you know, the sun's high and it's shining down on the dock, which creates a shadow underneath it. You skip this jig underneath the dock, you know, the fish get under it because they're trying to get out of that sun. Bait fish live under there, but a jig is a very good way to catch those fish that are up under the dock. You can skip it really far a lot of times. It's compact, so it's really accurate, versus trying to skip, you know, a big worm like this really far. This jig is gonna skip better because there's also gonna be a weight in front of this worm most of the time. And so just, it makes it a little bit more difficult. So definitely a jig is gonna be the go-to when you're wanting to skip docks or, you know, fish docks. You're definitely gonna have a jig. So when you're skipping a jig, the rod that you wanna use, you wanna try to stick to around 7 foot, maybe a little shorter. If, you know, I would say if you're shorter than 5'8", you know, if you're shorter than that, maybe a 7 foot's gonna be a little bit long. And maybe once you get over, if you're taller than 6'3", 6'4", you can get away with a little bit longer rod. But a 7 foot and a 7'2" rod, or that range is definitely the best range for skipping a jig. This one is my absolute favorite skipping rod. It's a Quantum Tour PT. It's a 7 foot medium heavy. I use a 7/3-to-1 reel. I don't like using a super high speed reel because I don't think they, you know, they wind up line really good, but I feel like you don't skip as good with a really high speed reel. And with a slower speed reel, you know, when you set the hook, that fish might try to swim further under the dock. So with a high speed reel, you can really take control of that fish. A 7 foot rod with a good tip. So you can see here, this rod has a really good tip, and that tip is perfect for making accurate skips. When you're skipping a jig, your accuracy has to be dead on the money, because a lot of times you're skipping under little cracks like that right there. And so to be able to do that, you have to be really, really accurate, practice your cast a lot. So a 7 foot to a 7'2" rod, medium heavy with a fast tip, allows you to just really put the bait where you want it to go. And the best thing to do for skipping a jig is practice, because you have to practice your cast or you're gonna really frustrate yourself. So definitely the most important rod and setup. This is also using 15 to 20 pound line, depending on the kind of docks, the clarity of the water. Anyhow, that's the setup. 7 foot medium heavy, 7/3-to-1, 17 pound line, 3/8 ounce jig. That's the #1 setup you pretty much have to have your fishing dock. Another setup I like to have as far as a slow fishing bait is a Texas rig. And the thing about a Texas rig is it's a completely different profile as a jig, but it you can fish it a lot of the same ways. It's not gonna skip as good, but I like using a Texas rig when, you know, maybe the jig bite isn't 100% good, or, you know, I'll pitch this a lot of times with the more open things. So like the ladder, or, you know, the chair that's hanging over in the water, or, you know, someone's umbrella that sank, or a tie up for a pontoon boat or something, whatever it is. Those PVC poles that go in the water that people tie up to. But I like it because it's just a different profile. Honestly, there's a lot of times where you can go skip a jig around a dock or pitch it around an area and then come back with a Texas rig and catch more fish. So what a lot of times will happen is if you go through an area you catch a lot of fish or catch a couple fish or whatever, but you feel like you didn't get enough bites, you feel like you should have caught more, you can come back through the same area, change up what you're doing. So if you use the jig the first time, use a Texas rig when you come back through, work out perfectly for you. This setup that I'm using is another shorter setup. It's not, I don't need a gigantic rod for this. This is a 7-foot heavy vapor. This is actually my favorite Texas rig rod. It is a meat stick all the way up the first probably 3/4 of the rod, and it has an extra fast tip. What an extra fast tip means is the bend of the rod is only in the rod tip. See that? So the backbone of this rod is really, really strong, and the tip is really fast. So that's really good for anything that has to be accurate, but you need a lot of power. That could be skipping a frog around. That could, anything that you're throwing at a target, and you have to have power to get the fish away. The target, the accuracy comes from the tip, and the power comes from the backbone. This one is not even it's not even pegged. A lot of times I'll use a bobber stopper and peg my weight so that it can't slide back and forth like that. But in the summertime I don't. I just let it go. It's a tungsten weight, just a regular worm hook, and I've got just a regular straight tail worm. Again, same size line, 15 to 20, depending on the weight. And really I kind of determine that by the weight that's on the bait. So I hate using like 20-pound line if you're using a tiny weight when you're pitching, because it kind of makes it more difficult. So I'll go down to 15 if I'm using a little bitty weight. On that I'll use a 7-3 or an 8-to-1 reel. I don't think it really matters a ton, and honestly that 8-to-1, if you're just pitching it around, you're not trying to skip, the 8-to-1 would be better. If you're trying to skip your Texas rig, I think the 7-3-to-1 would be better. All right, next is a SquareBill crankbait. This is a Crush 50 by 6 Cents. Obviously, SquareBill crankbaits caught millions of fish, but I think that when people talk about fishing docks, a crankbait gets a little bit overlooked because they're thinking about only fishing inside the docks or under them or the edges, but they leave out the area in between the two docks. So I've seen 100 times where I'm fishing behind someone on a stretch of docks, and the guy in front of me is just burning them. He'll hit the outsides, hit the corners, hit the ladders, hit the posts, onto the next one. The area in between the docks, especially in low light, early in the morning and the evening, you know, when there's clouds, the area in between each dock is really, really good. A SquareBill crankbait is a perfect lure to help pick that apart, because one, it dives down a little bit, so it's gonna stay on the bottom. It's hitting all those rocks, all those stumps, anything that's in the middle between the two docks. And also something that happens when they're building docks is, you know, they built this gigantic dock, and sometimes they've got scraps and they're not supposed to do it, but a lot of times they'll just push that stuff off in the water, and obviously it's polluting the water, and they're putting a bunch of wood and just junk into the lake. But you got to think about the guys who are building the dock. They don't want to carry all that stuff back. Sometimes it's easier for them to just accidentally drop it down in the lake. That's why you'll notice, you know, where did this random 5-gallon bucket of, you know, Quick Creek come from, or whatever, like whatever it is, it's in the water always around boat docks, and you got to think about what all is down there. So a SquareBill is going to allow you to bounce off of cover. You can make a lot of casts with it, and they just have a lot of drawing power. Another thing is cranking the outsides of the dock, so hitting all the posts, making casts where you can angle up and hit the very corner of a boat dock. With this, I'm throwing a 7-foot medium rod. I'm throwing 10 to 12 pound line, depending on how gnarly of stuff I'm fishing. Like if I know there's a bunch of junk, I'm gonna fish 12-pound line. If I know it's pretty much gonna be easy fishing, I try to fish 10-pound line. Also, if the docks are shallower, I'll fish 12-pound line. Like if I know they're super, super shallow, I'll use 12-pound line just so the bait gets higher off the bottom. It doesn't swim as deep. 7-foot medium, 6-3-to-1 reel. This is a vapor, quantum vapor, and yeah, that's that. There's 5 total setups. The next one is gonna be a topwater. And obviously the most popular topwater in the last couple of years is the Whopper Plopper. Now the Whopper Plopper is good for like 100 reasons. Originally I would have set a buzz bait, like several years ago I would have set a buzz bait in this situation, because I learned how to fish docks with all this same stuff, but a buzz bait instead of the Whopper Plopper. The better thing about a buzz bait than a Whopper Plopper is you can actually skip it. So when you're going and working around these docks, you can skip the buzzbait underneath the docks. And then when you're on the bank, if there's any laydown trees or anything, you can skip that buzzbait around laydowns. If you use, and I don't have one in here, but if you use a buzzbait that has a plastic on the back of it, like a horny toad or a swim bait or a crawl or anything on the, instead of you just having a skirt, if you thread a piece of, a plastic worm or whatever it is on the back of it, gives it some weight, gives it some buoyancy, so you can skip it around. But the whopper plopper is really good because, again, you can fish it really close to the dock, and on a dock that's got a high gap like this right here, if you make an accurate cast, you can throw a whopper plopper 10, 12 foot up under there and get a ton of bites doing it. It's just hard to skip it. Yeah, it's hard to skip it, but it's also hard to make pinpoint cast and get it, under a boat dock. It's pretty hard to do. But whopper plopper is also really good to fish in this open area like I was talking about in overcast or low light conditions. So you can use the crankbait and that whopper plopper depending on the bite and the depth. Like sometimes it'll be super shallow in between the two docks and you're going to the next one, but you can't use a square bill. I'll pick up that whopper plopper and make 5 or 6 casts in between the docks and catch a ton of fish doing it. The whopper plopper, I've got a 7'2" medium heavy rod. I've got 30 pound braid. I think 30 might be a little bit light because the problem with 30 is it handles the bait perfectly, but when you make a cast, like yesterday I made a cast with it, and sometimes your braid will lock up for no reason, especially like with a frog, your braid will just lock up and you didn't backlash or anything. Well, with 30 and a bait that's heavy like this whopper plopper, you'll break your braid. Like as soon as it locks up, you just fling your bait. And so that's the only reason I would say use 40 on this, because 30 sometimes it'll break on a cast. But 7'2" medium heavy rod, there's really no like pro reason for that. I just think a 7'2", good length, you can make a long cast. Like a lot of times in between these docks, when you're pitching to a dock, you're pitching really close, so you don't need anything that's like super long because you want to make an accurate pitch. But when you're pitching, like when you're making a long cast down the length of the dock, like all the way to the back, that is a pretty long cast. Like it's 40 yards from here to there. So a little bit longer rod help you get your bait over there. All right, so the last one on my list is going to be a spinning rod setup, and it's going to be a Wacky Rig Senko, and you can do either Nico rigged or just standard. So basically you take like a straight tail worm, take your O-ring tool and slide the worm inside the O-ring tool, slide an O-ring off on the worm like so. My favorite hook is this weedless Nico rig hook by VMC. The 1/0 is my favorite. The reason I like it is it's got that weed guard on it, and the weed guard flexes really, like it's barely even there. But if your bait's falling, it's not just gonna get hung up on something, but you can easily set the hook with a spinning rod. There's your Wacky Rig, and that's really good how it is by itself. But if you want to do a Nico rig, then you put a weight in the head part of it, or the fat part of it, not the head. See, like so. So now you've got the hook in the middle, the bait moves, flexes like this. It's got a lot of action, and the weight is in the like bottom side of it, I guess you call that. That way the worm stands up on its side, and then as you move it, it pulses like this in the water, except it does that sideways, with the bait returning to this position pretty much all the time. So has a really, really cool action. It skips good, and especially like on a pressured place or clear water. When you're fishing behind somebody and you see they're throwing something big, skipping a jig, a Nico rig or a Wacky Rig Senko are really good options because they're easy to fish, 2, they draw a ton of bites, and 3, it's a much more finesse presentation than if someone's burning this power fishing pattern in front of you. So and at some places they don't bite some of that stuff. It's hard, some places a jig isn't the best option. Some places this Nico rig is the best option. So I like a little bit shorter rod. I think a 6'10" is the best. A 7 foot, is obviously really good too. Medium heavy, that way you can set the hook on them. The rod has a bunch of bend, and that way you can play them on this light line and a smaller hook. 7 foot medium heavy, I like a 30 size reel, so this is an Accurus 30. This is a Quantum Accurus rod. I've got 15-pound braid to 10-pound fluorocarbon. So that's that setup. Again, the Whopper Popper, the Crush 50 SquareBill, the Texas rig, and last but not least, the jig. So that wraps up my top 5 fishing setups to fish boat docks. So it's not just skipping them, that's not just fishing around them, but it's a mixture of the both. It's the best 5 setups I think that everyone should use who's either getting into fishing boat docks or not, even someone who's experienced. I think that's the top 5 setups that they should have in their arsenal. And you can always go more, you can always extend that list. You could substitute a couple things. Sometimes instead of that SquareBill, I'll use a chatterbait, or you know, instead of that Whopper Plopper, I might use a regular Popper. You know, so some of those things can alternate, but I think overall that's pretty much the setups you need. So hope you guys are enjoying the content. I'm absolutely loving creating it for you. I'm super thankful for the growth of my page. Anyhow, other than that, I'm gonna go keep fishing and hopefully film some more videos for you guys. But as for now, I'm gonna sign off of here. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel down below. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you got any questions at all about what I used today, what I said today, if you think, you know, I could do something a little bit better or a little bit worse, or whatever the deal is, drop a comment down below. I'll read it, I'll respond to it, and it might be in one of my next videos if it's something that I'm curious about or I want to film about. So be sure to drop a comment down below, and other than that, I'll see you guys on the next one. All right guys, the most important thing about this video was, and I forgot to say it, is all of this quantum equipment, quantum rods, quantum reels, you can get for 25% off by going to quantumfishing.com, use the code DIF25. 25% off all of this stuff is one of the best deals you can get. That's basically like a Black Friday sale all year long. So if you're looking for a great rod and reel, I'll link everything below. My favorite jig rod, SquareBill rod, topwater rod, Texas rig, this Accurus setup. Use the code DIF25.